All right, guys, so welcome to Chapter 2. This is all going to be about engagement management. This is arguably the most critical chapter for keeping you out of prison. We like calling this chapter Drawing the Blueprint. Just like you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, you would never start a hack without a plan. So here's our plan of attack for this chapter. We're going to cover everything that happens before you even touch a keyboard. We'll discuss things like pre engagement activities, how to define the goals, and all the important scoping processes like the legal contracts you need, and finally, the logistics. So, in this phase, you're not a hacker just yet. You're just a consultant. You are a trusted advisor. So, we need to define the business goals. Why are we even here? Who are the stakeholders? And if you skip this, you might hack the wrong thing for the wrong reason. And so I want you to think yourself as a doctor. A surgeon doesn't just cut you open without asking what hurts first. Simply, we as pen testers must diagnose the client's fears. Are they afraid of ransomware, data theft, or just failing an audit? We need to prescribe the best test based on the symptoms that the client has. So that brings us into the why. There are usually three reasons that a client would call you. The first one's probably going to be compliance. They have to do it because the laws like PCI or HIPAA requires them to do so. They might be proactive, like they're launching a brand new application or a new facility, and they want to find bugs before the public does. Or it might be post incident, where they've already been hacked, and they want to verify that their new locks actually work. Most of the time, I find post incident and compliance the biggest reasons why someone calls me. So for the exam itself, you need to know the difference between a goal and a constraint. A goal are technical questions. Can you get admin access? Can you steal the database? Rather, a constraint, on the other hand, is going to be, well, don't test on our legacy servers, or you can only test at night. Constraints is what keeps the business running while we work. Because although we're here to do a pen test and we need to find the weaknesses, we do not need to destroy their network in doing so. That'd be counterintuitive and against what we're here for. So we need to start gathering some requirements. Our first thing is going to be recon the client. So basically, we need to plan the attack. We need to know our battlefield. Is it an on-premise attack? Is it a cloud like AWS or Azure? Now, because this is going to change a lot of our legal requirements of what we can and cannot do. Are we testing in production, a live environment where real money is made? Or is this a staging environment, a test environment, where it's safe to break things? We need to know these things. So the first thing is going to be communication and reporting. You must agree on how often that we talk. Do we have a daily email or is it a weekly call? How often does the stakeholders of the company and us as pen testers talk? Now, this is a key concept for the exam itself, because if you find a critical vulnerability like a hole in the firewall, you do not wait for the report. You invoke the immediate notification procedure and you contact them immediately. Just as if you find a breach already in there and maybe an active exploit that's actively going on, we do the immediate notification procedure. We do not wait for the report to let them know, hey, so like 3 weeks ago we saw a hacker in your network. We don't wait for that. Now, the context itself, we need a 24/7 emergency contact list. If a server crashes at 2 a.m. because we were, vulnerability scanning it, I need to know who to wake up. And so this contact list is going to have a couple different things in it. The first one is going to be our technical stakeholders. This is going to be our primary point of contact, our POC. This is our best friend. They're going to handle all of our access and our badges. Then we need to know some of the technical staff. These are the sysadmins, the devs, anyone that we are going to interface with for their systems. Because they are going to know where the bodies are buried. We need to work with them, not just against them. Our next group that we need to talk to is going to be security. Here's a big strategic question. Do we have to warn the blue team? If we warn them, it's an audit, good for finding bugs. But if we don't warn the blue team, it's a red team exercise, good for testing their reaction time. It all depends on the stakeholder and why are we here? What test are we doing? Lastly, we need to know some business people, the stakeholders that are going to be in charge. The first group that we're going to need to know is the C-suite. And we need to know the ones that care about the budget and the reputation. They're going to be the audience for the executive summary. So this might be the CIO, the CISO, the CEO. This is normally a C-title person at least. Then we're going to need to know legal. We need to know who their legal representation is because they're here to ensure that we follow regulations like GDPR or HIPAA and that our contracts protect the company from any liability. Okay. Now, once we know who we're going to contact, we're going to then define the scope of our engagement. Creating the scope is creating the map of the battlefield. It's not just on the map that we're going to attack, it's everything. So if it's not on the map, we don't attack it, okay? Basically, they're going to give us the do's and the don'ts here. The components here is they're going to give us some targets, some rules of engagement, some timelines, and basically give us all the rules that we need to do. Now, this might be a guided exercise because most companies don't understand what they should and should not be asking. So as pen testers, we should have maybe the latest NIST framework or one of the CFAA guidelines to make sure that we are asking the right questions and have a proper rules of engagement. Now, once we have our target rules and timelines, we can move on to, well, the specific targets themselves. We need specific IP addresses, what we like to call them the CIDR blocks. And remember, one wrong digits and you're hacking either a different company or a different network. And that is a felony. So this is why we have to be very careful on who we attack. Now, they're also going to give us some exclusions. Give us the exclusion list. These are the systems that are explicitly forbidden from touching. We like to call them the off-limits machines. Once we have our targets, we can then ask them, well, do you do anything in the cloud? Do you have any mobile apps? Because if we are testing a mobile app, a web portal, or an API, we need to know some of the other rules. Because if we're testing in AWS or Azure, remember that the shared responsibility model is now in effect. We can test the client's VM, but we cannot attack Amazon's physical infrastructure without written permission. And there are specific rules written actually in Azure and AWS and even GCP that you have to follow whenever you're doing a pen test against a cloud application. Now, there are some specialized targets that we might want to find. For instance, we might be doing a wireless attack. So Wi-Fi, we need the specific SSIDs because we must ensure that we don't accidentally de-auth the coffee shop next door. We need to know physical boundaries. If we are doing physical entry, are we allowed to pick locks? Are we trying to tailgate behind somebody? What are the do's and the don'ts for physical entry? For the APIs, we normally need the documentation like the Swagger files. This tells us how to talk to it. It's the documentation that normally is provided to developers when they develop an application to interface with an API. All right, so that brings us to the rules of engagement. The ROE is the mission code of conduct. It's going to scope what we test. The scope defines what we test. The ROE defines how we test it. There we go. Are we going to be allowed to be noisy? Are we allowed to break things? Are we just looking but not touching? What are we doing? They're going to let us know what we are allowed and not allowed to do. So some of those components might be like the ROE lists the permitted actions. Is phishing allowed? Is social engineering allowed? Is a denial of service attack allowed? And hint, most of the time a DOS is never allowed, okay? But they're going to give us some other things too, like the timelines, when we're allowed to test, when we're not allowed to test, is it nights, weekends only, certain things, okay? They're going to help us out with our do's and our don'ts. Now, we do need to have the escalation path actually put out into the ROE because when things go wrong, and they will, who do we call? So this is going to be the hierarchy. We need that primary contact for routine updates, the technical contact if we get blocked by our firewall and need a reset, or even an emergency contact like a 24/7 number for when, a server goes down. Now, here's the big red warning for this chapter. Scope creep is the enemy of profit and legality. So the client says, well, since you're here, can you check this server too? The answer is, I'd love to, but we need to amend the contract first. Testing outside the SOW is illegal. We need to make sure that they understand that the statement of work, the ROE, are contracts, and we're held against it because if we go against our own contracts, it gives them legal bodies to sue us. And don't trust everybody who says, oh, well, we won't do that, because the moment that you take down the company and you lose them millions of dollars, now you are you're liable 100% because you went against the SOW and the ROE. So, how do we protect ourselves? Well, we're going to need that legal and compliance. The shield. We need to cover the paperwork that keeps us safe. And we need to understand the contract types and regulatory requirements for driving the tests. Now, in Chapter 1, we talked a little bit about these, but I like to bring them up again and again because we really need to memorize these acronyms and know what they are. They are on the Pentest. So if you're using this course to actually prepare for the Pentest Plus, just know they are going to be there. The NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, is we promise not to leak their secrets. The MSA is the long-term contract covering payment in general terms. This is like your general, just like, hey, we are going to be in business together for a little bit. Here's what we're going to be doing. Now, the exact work we're doing is going to be in the statement of work, the specific rules for this job. Normally in the SOW, we'll find the ROE in here. We'll find everything that we need to interface with the company. So these are the do's and the don'ts, and this is how we're going to act and how they're going to act through the statement of work. Now, the statement of work is, again, our get out of jail free card. It's the specific legal authorization for the exact test. It lists the specific scope, the timeline, the deliverables, and the liability limitations. Remember, I hit SOW quite a bit, especially with the ROE, because this is our legal get out of jail free card. This is what separates us from a true hacker and an ethical hacker. We want to be ethical because we don't want to go with the orange jumpsuit behind these bars. So how do we stay out of that? Now we got to think about regulatory compliance. For instance, if they take credit cards, requirement 11.3 requires them to have an annual test. So they have to have a security test. And that's where we come in. So PCI may have us come in on purpose. HIPAA is the same thing. If they handle PHI data, they may make sure the data is secure, and they also have a audit schedule that they have to adhere to. Some of the other regulatory bodies would be like GDPR. GDPR is for customers in Europe, and even if we're a US-based company, if you have customers in Europe, you must respect their strict privacy laws or be held accountable. Lastly would be SOX, which is public trading companies. This is for financial reporting systems, also known as separation of duties. Enron, from way back when, is what actually created the SOX because they had insider trading, embezzlement going on, that SOX compliance became a regulatory body. So if you're a publicly traded company, in other words, you're on the stock exchange, you're going to have certain rules and regulations over your financial reporting systems, and SOX is what actually is going to define that. Now, there are some GRC concepts that I always like to make sure that people understand because this exam does love the GRC, so governance, risk, and compliance. Governance is the policies and rules the companies follow. This is the PCI, this is the HIPAA, this is the GDPR. The risks are the pen testing. The risk is pen testing is a risk assessment tool. So we have to understand what kind of risk does a company need to protect themselves against. Well, pen testing is one of the things that will help identify those risks through risk assessment. And then lastly, we have compliance. Now, with compliance, we're just checking to make sure that they follow the laws. So the governance bodies made the rules. We know the risks. Now, how do we stay in compliance to make sure that we're not susceptible to an attack? Now that we have all the legal stuff, we actually need to do some actual work. We need to estimate the effort, the personnel, and even pick the tools that we're going to use throughout our pen test. So make sure that you understand that. The first factor is going to be estimating our time of effort, maximum effort, of course. So the factors will be like, well, how long is this going to take? And it's going to depend on the complexity. What is the scope? What are we actually doing here? We need to know whether or not this is a black box or a white box or even a gray box test. Remember, a black box is always going to take longer because we don't know anything about this company and we're going to have to discover everything. White boxes are faster because they give us everything. They give us the maps, the documentation. Now, we need to know the window, the time constraint. So if we can only test on weekends, a 40-hour test will take, well, a month to finish because we can only test on the weekends. So it will take some time to get that done. Once we know all of this, we can then try to pick our team. Our team needs to match the skill of the scope. You wouldn't send a plumber to fix electrical wiring. So we need to have our specialties. Match the skill to the scope. We need the web apps tests. If we have web app tests, we probably need coders. If we have network tests, we need infrastructure professionals. If we have social engineering tests that need to happen, we need people with high charisma and psychology skills. Right? We need those interpersonal skills there. Once we have our team, we can then start building our toolkit. We normally use what we like to call a hybrid approach. We're going to have some open source with some commercial tools. Some of the open source tools would be like Nmap and Metasploit, and these are industry standards and are 100% free. But there's also going to be some commercial paid products like Burp Suite or Nessus, which costs money but offers automation and better reporting, and we're going to need both. So we'll need to figure out what tools do we need to complete this pen test. So as you go through this course, you'll notice that Pentest actually has 1.5 billion tools. Knowing what the tools are and where to use them is the reason why they hire us as pen testers, is we know the tools that the hackers are using. All right, so let's cover Chapter 2. Remember, we talked about pre-engagement consulting. We talked about the scoping phase, the legal phase, resource planning. We went through the ROE, basically anything that we had to do before we even put hands on a keyboard. So that's going to wrap up the engagement management section. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you for Chapter 3.